Nostalgia Net Forum. Television. Local.
Does anyone remember this kid's show? It was called, Candle Cove, and I must have been 6 or 7. I never found reference to it anywhere, so I think it was on a local station around 1971 or 72. I lived in Ironton at the time. I don't remember which station, but I do remember it was on at a weird time, 4 p.m.
It seems really familiar to me. I grew up outside of Ashland and was 9 years old in 72. Candle Cove. Was it about pirates? I remember a pirate marionette at the mouth of a cave talking to a little girl.
Yes! Okay, I'm not crazy. I remember Pirate Percy. I was always kind of scared of him. He looked like he was built from parts of other dolls, real low budget. His head was an old porcelain baby doll, looked like an antique that didn't belong on the body. I don't remember what station this was. I don't think it was WTSF, though.
Sorry to resurrect this old thread, but I know exactly what show you mean, Skyshale. I think Candle Cove ran for only a couple of months in 71, not 72. I was 12 and I watched it a few times with my brother. It was channel 58, whatever station that was. My mom would let me switch to it after the news. Let me see what I remember. It took place in Candle Cove, and it was about a little girl who imagined herself to be friends with pirates. The pirate ship was called the Laughingstock, and Pirate Percy wasn't a very good pirate because he got scared too easily. And there was Calliope music constantly playing. Don't remember the girl's name, Janice or Jade or something. I think it was Janice.
Thank you, Jaren. Memories flooded back when you mentioned the Laughingstock in Channel 58. I remember the bow of the ship was a wooden smiling face with the lower jaw submerged. It looked like it was swallowing the sea, and it had that awful Ed Wynn voice and laugh. I especially remember how jarring it was when they switched from the wooden, plastic model to the foam puppet version of the head that talked.
I think I remember that too. Do you remember this part, Skyshale? You have to go inside.
Oh, Mike, I got a chill reading that. Yes, I remember. That's what the ship always told Percy when there was a spooky place he had to go in, like a cave or a dark room where the treasure was. And the camera would push in on Laughingstock's face with each pause. You have to go inside. With his two, eyes askew and that flopping foam jaw and the fishing line that opened and closed it. Oh my god, it just looks so cheap and awful. You guys remember the villain? He had a face that was just a handlebar mustache above a really, really tall, narrow teeth.
I honestly thought the villain was Pirate Percy. I was about 5 when this show was on. Nightmare fuel.
That wasn't the villain, the puppet with the mustache. That was the villain's sidekick, Horace Horrible. He had a monocle too, but it was on top of the mustache. I used to think that meant he only had one eye. But yeah, the villain was another marionette, the Skin Taker. I can't believe what they let us watch back then.
Jesus H. Christ, the Skin Taker. What kind of a kid show were we watching? I seriously could not look at the screen when the Skin Taker showed up. He just descended out of nowhere on his strings, just a dirty skeleton wearing that brown top hat and cape, and his glass eyes that were too big for his skull. Christ almighty.
Wasn't his top hat and cloak all sewn up crazily? Was that supposed to be children's skin?
Yeah, I think so. Remember, his mouth didn't open and close. His jaw just kind of slid back and forth. I remember the little girl said, "Why does your mouth move like that?" And the Skin Taker didn't look at the girl but at the camera and said, "To grind your skin."
Oh, I'm so relieved that other people remember this terrible show. I used to have this awful memory, a bad dream I had where the opening jingle ended, the show faded in from black, and all the characters were there, but the camera was just cutting to each of their faces, and they were just like screaming, and the puppets and marionettes were flailing spastically and just like all screaming. The girl was just moaning and crying like she'd been through hours of this. I woke up many times from that nightmare. I used to wet the bed when I had it.
I don't think that was a dream. I remember that. I remember that was an episode.
No, not possible. There was no plot or anything. I mean, literally just standing in place crying and screaming for the whole show.
Maybe I'm manufacturing the memory because you said that, but I swear to God I remember seeing what you described. They just screamed.
Oh my god, yes. The little girl Janice, I remember seeing her shake, and the skin taker screaming through his gnashing teeth, his jaw careening so wildly I thought it would come off its wire hinges. I turned it off, and that was the last time I ever watched it. I ran to tell my brother, and we didn't have the courage to turn it back on.
Hey, I visited my mom today at the nursing home. I asked her about when I was a little kid in the early 70s, when I was 8 or 9, and if she remembered a kid's show, Cove. She said she was surprised I could remember that, and I asked why, and she said, because I used to think it was so strange that you said, I'm gonna go watch Cove now, Mom. And then you would tune the TV to static and just watch dead air for 30 minutes. You had a big imagination with your little pirate show. The following was found in an envelope on a bus bound for Chicago. I'm writing this so that when the room is eventually opened, people will perhaps understand the things they find within, so that I'll no longer be thought of as the madman. Part of me already fears that I am. It all began with a reading of the will. My mother, my only living parent left, passed away due to a heart attack in her New England home. Her body had been found by one of the women who came to clean every few days, and the news had not come as a shock to any of the family. She'd had 2 previous heart attacks, and with her smoking and drinking, she wasn't exactly in the best of health. It'd been a surprise that she wanted me to have the old family home, though I never exactly had much love for the place. I mean, I moved out in the first chance I got. Honestly, I hadn't been expecting to get anything in the will, given how long it had been since we'd even spoken. I was surprised she hadn't written me out, the way that she'd tried to write me out of the family's history by removing any picture of me from the house. Certainly didn't plan to keep the creepy, rundown old place. But at the same time, I knew that there was a chance I could fetch a bit of cash in the market if someone put a little work into it, fix it up. And as I was currently between jobs, it might be a worthwhile use of my time. So, I got my brother, a cousin, they all came over and they were helping fix it up. Which, they happily agreed to. There actually wasn't as much work to do as I'd first thought, as the house seemed to be in better repair than I remembered it being. I guess my mother, cheap as she was, had still finally been forced to actually get someone to fix up some of the bigger problems to the house. It was little stuff that needed repair, and a new coat of paint, but it only ended up taking about a week or so in the end. It was during that time that I first found it. I don't have the best memories of the old place, given how long it had been since I'd stayed there, but one of the first things I noticed while I was walking along the ground floor hallway was that there was a door that hadn't been there before. Stared at it for a few moments, more out of confusion than anything else, before trying to push it open. Wouldn't budge an inch. And asked my brother if he knew what might be down there, and he shook his head, saying that he'd not even noticed it before now. My cousin said that she'd noticed a big, old-fashioned looking key in the keyhole of the door the last time she'd come round to visit, but she had no clue where it might be right now. I shrugged, not really thinking much of it at the time, just figuring I'd have to get someone to bust the door down at some point before I got the house sold. Now, the room that none of us wanted to go in was Emerson's. It was weird, seeing all his old toys and coloring books still there, as if our mother had been trying to bring her son back by clinging onto the past. Emerson had always been our mother's favorite, the one who she'd lavished all of her attention on. I saw that she stuck his drawings up all over the place, drawings of pirate ships, odd, comical-looking figures with these strange designs. My brother told me that when he'd stayed for dinner, our mother would still set a place for Emerson, as if she expected him to just show up out of the blue. Missing for all these years, and she was still expecting him to come wandering through the door. The first night I spent alone in the house, I didn't sleep very well. Crazy as it sounds. I kept thinking that I heard noises in the house, people talking to each other. I must have checked each and every one of the rooms 12 times, only to find each and every one of them empty. I even checked to see if I'd left the TV on, but it was still unplugged. I'd go back to bed, and then, after a little while, the noises would start up again. Sometimes I was sure I could hear music as well. It's around 4 a.m. A thought occurred to me, and I went to the locked door in the hallway, pressing my ear against it and listening closely. I was sure I heard what sounded like a muffled tune coming from within. The next day I went into town to buy some food, and after the events of last night I also bought a hammer to knock that old door down. It was while chatting with the cashier that I learned something unsettling about the neighborhood that I'd temporarily moved into. I casually brought up where I was staying after he commented on me being new around here, and I told him I was planning to try and sell up. He let out a short burst of laughter before looking embarrassed about it, and when I asked him to explain, he said the following: "No one with sense is going to buy that dump. No one with half a brain would buy any house within 10 miles of that place," he said, not looking up from the groceries he had packed away. "Why not? Seems like a nice enough neighborhood," I replied. "Oh, because all them kids going missing, of course." He'd go on to explain that for the past few years, there had been a sudden and disturbing rise in the number of children vanishing from their homes in the area. There had been search parties formed. The police, the FBI, they got involved. But nothing turned up. The kids had vanished from their homes with no signs of forced entry or struggle, and no evidence left behind as to who might have been responsible. People were trying to move away as fast as possible, but there were few who would buy a house in the area once they heard about what was going on. No one wanted to move to a place where a child kidnapper or killer was active. I have to admit the story kind of creeped me out. Knowing that something so strange was going on near where I was staying made the odd going on of the previous night seem even more unsettling to me, and so as soon as I got home, I decided to bust that door down. And my neighbor, a fairly nice young woman named Charlie, who I'd gotten to know, was working on her home's front lawn when I got back and noticed the hammer in my hand as I headed towards that front door of my home. Not really wanting to be alone when I broke the door down, I gave her an abridged version of the events, leaving out the odd noises of last night, that is, and asked if she'd like to join me in finding out what was in the room. "Mysterious locked door. Very Scooby-Doo," she said as I grinned. "Sure, I'll be Fred, you be Daphne," I replied, happy to have someone with me. Her presence making the nervousness I had felt while listening to the cashier's story start to fade a little. Trust me, I'm more Velma than Daphne. Once inside the house, I packed away the various groceries, poured drinks for myself and Charlie, before we went to the white door. It only took a few swings from the hammer to smash it open, the lock breaking beneath the assault, and the door swinging open. Behind it was a staircase, leading down to a darkened basement below. I stared in confusion at the stairs, not believing what I was seeing. Our house didn't have a basement, I was sure of that. And yet, suddenly I seemed to recall seeing this before. I could remember playing with Emerson one day, daring each other. Emerson had always been afraid of pretty much everything, and I, in the way of older brothers everywhere, had taken far too much pleasure in tormenting him. I seem to remember the two of us stood at the top of the staircase, me daring him to go down into the dark while calling him a chicken. "Come on, Emerson," I had said to him. "You have to go inside." Charlie and I began to descend the old creaking steps towards the basement, the hammer still clutched tight in my hands. I didn't know what we'd find, but I knew that I felt better being armed with something that could do some damage. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, Charlie began feeling around for a light switch, finding one after a few moments and flicking it on. The room was instantly illuminated, revealing what was inside. "Oh my God. Look at all this cool stuff," Charlie cried out. The basement was full of puppets. There were dozens of them, all lined up in various shelves, all in very good repair, as if they were brand new. There were puppets of all shapes and sizes, some of them being very human-like, while others were Muppet-like animal creatures. Others were more monstrous. There were props from what looked like the sets of kid shows, I guess. None of it had any dust on it, as if someone had been down to tidy up just moments before. I could guess what all this was from, but what it was doing down here, I had no idea. "What is all this?" Charlie asked, as she picked up one of the puppets, a guy with a massive mustache and a monocle over one eye. She grinned, playing around with him, moving his limbs up and down. My brother used to work on a kids show years ago, Pirate Place or something, I think it was called. It only ran for a couple of years because it got canceled. I guess this stuff's all the old puppets and sets from the show, I said as we looked around the room. My eyes fell on a creepy-looking skeleton puppet with a really weird mouth and a top hat upon his head. Ugly-looking thing, I thought to myself at that moment. "No way. Do you have any idea how much some of this stuff might be worth? Collectors pay a fortune for things like this on eBay," Charlie said, setting the puppet down gently on one of the shelves. I glanced around at the rest of the contents of the room. Apart from the puppets and set pieces, there was an old sewing machine set on a desk that was otherwise completely bare. There was no sign of anything that could have been the source of the tune that I'd heard before. Deciding that I must have imagined it, probably due to lack of sleep and being back in the old place, I did my best to forget about my fears and concentrate on the opportunity before me now. There was just one thing that troubled me as I looked around. On the desk the sewing machine was set on, there were several odd red stains spattered over it. As I stared at them, I was sure, out of the corner of my eye, that the odd-looking skeleton puppet's head twitched in my direction. The next few days went by without anything odd happening, really. I put the puppets up on eBay, had a few people come to visit the house. The only thing that was strange was when one couple visited the basement. All the color drained out of the husband's face when his eyes fell on the skeleton puppet. He just turned, left the basement, and the house. He went to the car, started it up, and sat there until his wife joined him after apologizing for his rudeness, and the two of them just drove away. Later that night, I was sure that I heard the old sewing machine in the basement. I went down to check. At the same time, looking at the darkened doorway, I suddenly felt very frightened. And when there was a knock at the door, the sudden noise almost made me jump out of my skin. My head jerked to the side towards the source of the noise. Taking a moment to steady my nerves, I walked to the door, opening it cautiously, and I saw Charlie standing there. "We need to talk," she said. She said that she mentioned to a friend of hers about the find in the basement a few days ago. When she brought up the name Pirate Place, he'd gone quiet and asked her to describe the puppets. He looked afraid, and she said, as if he'd seen a ghost. He told her to move house, get away from me, and from those damn things, as he referred to the puppets. Growing increasingly hysterical as the conversation had gone on, he'd repeated over and over that it wasn't safe to be around them, that they could see you through them. He'd rambled at length about physical avatars and the signal, none of which had made any sense to her. Apparently, he used to work in television, and he had known my brother. He said that he'd sat down with Emerson in what he called the script room and then started raving about knowing where the stories came from. Charlie said that she'd never seen him like this before, that he seemed to almost be psychotic. His eyes bugged out of his head, his face glistening with sweat. She'd been worried that he was about to have some kind of attack. Was your brother involved in anything weird? She asked me. And I honestly didn't know how to respond to that. I mean, Emerson had always been an odd kid, no doubt about that, but I couldn't imagine him ever provoking such a frightened reaction in anyone, let alone a grown man. I asked her if he'd said why the puppets were so awful, and she shrugged. All the stuff he was saying wasn't making much sense. He just said, it's not the puppets, it's what made them. And then he got up and he said he couldn't be in my house anymore, just ran out to his car, drove off. I decided that as she'd shared her weirdness with me, maybe I could open up about some of the weirdness in my life right now. I explained about the odd noises. The music, the sewing machine seeming to turn itself on. Against my better judgment, we decided to descend into the pitch-black basement once again. I mean, I don't know what I expected to find, but I was sure that something would be wrong. So when we saw that nothing seemed to have changed or been moved, I don't know, I felt an odd sense of almost disappointment. Kind of wanted for there to be something strange down there, just to prove that I wasn't imagining all of this, to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy. And that's when Charlie spotted the door. It was when she flicked off the light as we began to go up, casting one last look back into the darkness, and noticed that there was light coming from somewhere. Not very bright, but nonetheless a light source. Moving swiftly, we shoved aside one of the shelves of puppets and felt along the wall behind it to confirm what Charlie had believed to be the case. There was a door behind it. I told you this was all kinds of Scooby-Doo, Charlie said with a grin on her face, clearly enjoying herself. I smiled, which was something I definitely wouldn't have been able to do if she wasn't there. It was nice to have someone to share this insanity with. We went along the wall, trying to find some way to open the door, some handle or switch to make it open. From behind it, I was sure that I could hear something. It sounded almost like music. Circus music? A cheerful, upbeat tune. But also off somehow, as if there was something not quite right about it. Out of the corner of my eye, I was sure that the puppet with the ridiculous mustache and monocle had moved, and I realized how ridiculous that sounds, but I was certain of it. It was just the tiniest movement, the twitch of its head towards the skeleton puppet as if waiting for orders. I thought to myself, and then I was wondering why that thought had even popped into my head. With a bit of work, we managed to strip away the wallpaper that was covering most of the door, revealing that it was bright red in color. The paint chipped and flaked in places with a small keyhole, no handle. I assumed that it just pushed inwards once unlocked, or perhaps slid to the side, as there was no place for a handle to have once been either. It was then that I noticed Charlie had stopped smiling. In fact, she was just staring at the door with what looked like a mix of confusion and fear, taking a few steps back from it. When I asked her what was wrong, she shook her head and made excuses to leave. I asked her if she was all right. She told me she was tired, promised to help me try and find the key to the door in the morning. I mean, it was getting late, so it was plausible enough, but I knew that something was wrong here. For the rest of the evening, I looked through Emerson's old things in his room, looking for some clue perhaps as to what it was that had inspired such fear in Charlie's friend. For the most part, it was old toys, childhood drawings, nothing much of use. There were a few things that were odd, though. There's a picture that I guess Emerson had done when he was little. There was a crude drawing of a boy sat in his bed that I think was meant to be Emerson himself. Around him stood several figures. One was just a stick figure with a hat on its head. Another was a portly man with a cartoonish mustache and teeth. And there was a third that was very odd. It was just a scribble in the outline of a person. A black, shadowy scribble. It was a circle drawn above the three figures, and the boy and lines were shown coming down from it, leading to the boy's head. For some reason, looking at those lines, the words tendrils came to mind. There was a picture of a red door. The words, "Where they take them," was scrawled in large letters beneath it. And the final picture was of the stick man and the man with the mustache leading several smaller figures towards a third. Now, this one was a woman, whether a rather well-drawn one in comparison to the crude, basic nature of the others, except for the face. The face was just 2 dots for eyes and a line for a mouth. The words, "Where they take them," was written here as well. There was a message on my answering machine from Charlie the next day. She said she'd gone to stay with her girlfriend for a few days, just to clear her head, and apologized for leaving so suddenly the previous night. Her voice sounded odd. Kind of shaky, really. And she said not to bother with the door. She tried to sound calm and casual when she said it, but there was fear in her voice. She said it was probably best to forget about the whole thing and just cover up the basement. Not even mention it to the potential buyers of the house. She said it'd be a good idea to take the puppets off of eBay as well. I really should have done as she asked. Instead, I spent the rest of the day ransacking the house, searching for the key to that door. I looked everywhere with little success until, almost on a whim, I decided to search Emerson's room more thoroughly. And there, hidden in one of his old pillowcases, was a key. I poured myself a drink to steady my nerves, sitting down to watch the TV. I remember the old thing never picked up much when we were little. Channels were always full of static. Seemed to be working better now, at least, and then the news came on talking about another disappearance in the area. A girl of 12 this time vanished from her home in the middle of the night. I flipped through the channels, looking for something a little less grim while I finished my drink. Getting up, I headed down the steps into the basement, striding towards the door, ready to open it. The skeleton puppet was sat at the sewing machine now. I knew I hadn't moved it, and neither had Charlie and the other puppets. Their heads seemed to be turned towards it, as if they were waiting for it to do something, to say something. I mean, God, it was a hideous thing. Had an awful, misshapen mouth, looking awful. God knows why the prop designer had made it look like that. At that moment, the words, "to grind your skin," popped into my head. I put the key into the door, and sure enough, it unlocked it. The door pushing inward with ease, revealing the room that lay beyond it. It was illuminated by a single dirty bulb, making the contents of the room easy to see. Dear Lord, the smell. The only thing worse was the sight of what was littered around the room. Children's shoes and clothes, some spattered with old, dried blood, were piled in a heap in one corner of the room. The floorboards were stained with large patches of red, one of which, as I stepped into it, I realized was still somewhat fresh, sticky, like soda spilled on a movie theater floor. The room smelt of spoiled meat, burnt hair, and it took all I had not to throw up as I entered it, wondering how the smell hadn't traveled from this room to the basement. There was a pile of old video cassettes in one corner of the room, all labeled with things like Emerson's first bike ride and Emerson's first spelling bee. All old home movies, I guessed. But mixed in with some of them were tapes labeled Candle Cove, Episode 4, and Season 3 pilot episode. I picked up a few and noticed that there were bloody fingerprints on several. There was a series of steps leading down further into the blackness at the rear of the room, and I felt oddly compelled to go down there. How far down did this go? How was this even here beneath my family home without me ever knowing it? And yet, I felt like I did know about it. Looking at those steps, I felt like I remembered being in this room before. I was a child, and it had been empty then, and there I stood, with Emerson, at the foot of those stairs. Emerson, you have to go inside, I'd whispered to him, taking delight in how terrified he looked. He had gone down into the dark, and my head throbbed with pain. It actually physically hurt to try and remember, as if something was willing me not to. Had there been someone down there with us? I was sure I remembered there being someone in the room besides the two of us. The more I thought about it, our mother? No, not our mother, but another woman. Why couldn't I remember her face? I began to take unsteady steps down the stairs. The more I walked, the closer I got to another door, another red door. The key fit the lock of this one as well, and it opened with ease. There was music coming from within now, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore. I felt it pulling me towards it, calling me like a siren song. I had to go inside, I thought to myself. I had to go inside. I wasn't alone in this room. I burned all the puppets later that night, not that I imagined it matters. They'd been destroyed before, and it hadn't stopped them from coming back. They're just wood and paint and cloth, nothing but a conduit. They allowed them to come through. Allowed them to walk through the door and come here, and oh God. The door. I know where they go now. I know where they go. Oh, cry out, Jesus, please. I know where they go. I saw it. They took me there. The way they took my brother when he was a child. They need us. I don't know why they need us, but they need us. And that's what he said. through that horrible misshapen mouth, those eyes rolling in his sockets wildly. They needed my brother and they needed me, and my family isn't safe. The signal needs us. The story needs us. The ship came to the cave. Emerson was laughing and crying at the same time as he spoke the words I knew were coming. As he told me what I had to do, it was waiting for me. I saw that... I ran. You may think me a coward for not helping them, not even trying to save them, but I know where the ship is taking them now. I know where the voyage leads. I know who's waiting at the end. I pray to God, but I know that it'll do no good. I know now. I know things that no one should ever know. I know that Emerson learned that day the signal found him. I know what Emerson learned the day the signal found him. I know the things he learned in that dark place where the music comes from. Music played on instruments crafted of bone and organs wrapped in flesh. It's always there, now in my head, playing in an endless loop. The signals found me like it found Emerson that day I made him go down those stairs. Like it found our mother. I know why she did what she did. I know what she knew, and I know where Emerson is. I saw him. I saw him on the ship. My God, the ship. The laughing was the worst. I wish it would stop laughing. I sealed up the basement, but I know that one day someone will go down there again. I wrote this so that when they discover the things I know, they'll find down there, they'll know neither I nor my mother were responsible, perhaps, so they'll have the courage to do what I don't. And they can destroy this terrible place. They can burn it to the ground. The only thing holding me back is the fear that perhaps this place is not merely the door to their cage, but the cage itself. I mean, if the house were to be destroyed, perhaps they'd be able to spread. I want to apologize to my family. I hope they'll forgive me for what I'm about to do. I hope they'll be able to understand. And my brother, if this reaches you, please don't go into that house and don't sell it, board it up, let it stand forgotten. A creepy old building for people to stare and wonder at. Maybe that'll hold them back at least. The sewing machine's going in all hours of the day now. I know it's him. Sewing himself new additions to that terrible cape. She lets me keep the skin, you see. He gets to keep the skin. I'm so sorry, Emerson. I don't hate you for the things you did. I wish I could help you or at least put you out of your misery. I know they won't let you rest. I know you can't be free of them now, and I see them out of the corner of my eyes sometimes. They're gonna take me to the ship. I won't let them. I'll die the way I choose. Seek and carry my body away, wonderful, hopeful, far from where they can ever find it. This letter was found lying beside a VHS tape. The tape proved to be nothing but static, although those who watched it reportedly felt a sense of unease and nausea when they tried to view it. The Grimes home was searched, and the belongings of over 23 children who had gone missing in the local area were discovered within. No trace of the children themselves were found within the house or near it, however. The basement and the secret room were both as the letter described them. However, there were no stairs leading down to a further sub-basement or anywhere on the property. The puppets all also appeared to be completely undamaged, despite the claim that they had been burnt. The tapes mentioned in the letter were missing. 2 families have since lived in the Grimes home. Neither stayed for more than a few months, reporting strange smells, odd noises around the house, and things going missing. One reported sensing something terrible in the basement, and her children spoke of horrible dreams about a ship that would be taking them away, and the bony man from the TV watching them at night. The house is now abandoned, having been purchased and then left empty by one Adrian Grimes in early 2011. The puppets and set pieces of Candle Cove, mistakenly named Pirate Place by Grimes in the letter, an early working title for the show that Emerson Grimes later abandoned, supposedly vanished shortly before Adrian Grimes made the purchase. The whereabouts of Jason Grimes remain unknown. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or by listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. I know I haven't had as many updates as I would like to have on the channel lately, and things just kind of get really hard with shit that's happening in my family. But hey, I wanted to say thank you so much for being around, thank you so much for still supporting me and for coming back to listen to new stories. If you guys want to get updates anytime that I do upload, then please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Or if you're listening over a podcast, I think it's still a subscribe button or a follow button or whatever happen. Those happen to be. As always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody out there on patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. A very, very big thank you to everybody there, and to especially Jordan Humble, Diana Kraus, King Crab, Calcifer420, Veronica Lynn Lopez, Marlon Chavez, Azazel66603, Ethan Leon, Polaris Prospect X, Blake Rattler, Viceroy Scorn, Samara Lynn, Disciple, SullyMan, Brandon Mendoza, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Scruffy the Janitor, Brenna Crow, LaQueda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Dante Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, CursepoxPrimarch, M, Jettis Pet, Clonable, Jay Kieran, Mike, Himbo Jerry, Crusader Chocobo, Remember the Sun, Estebean, Hour Minute Second Time, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Red Shadowcat, Turtleman, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Voice of Sand, Phicomel, Melted Lake, Tully Sue, Croconut 509, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Hades Nephew, Tommy Walters, Acid System, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Tristan Pelton, Ball Arms the Rat, The Ginger Bros, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kinchin. To all of you guys there, everybody who's down in the description, and everybody who can just give $1, I want to say thank you to you guys. And if you would like to join this list in the description, head over to patreon.com/MrCreepy. And if you would like to join this list in the description, sweet dreams.